Right now, at this exact moment, Iranian ballistic missiles are raining down on Saudi Arabia's most critical oil infrastructure. The Abqaiq processing facility, responsible for processing over 5 million barrels per day, roughly 5% of global oil supply, is under direct attack. Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps claims successful strikes on multiple targets across Saudi Aramco's eastern facilities. Saudi Arabia's Ministry of Defense states that air defenses intercepted the majority of incoming missiles but confirms impacts at undisclosed locations. This is the first time since the 1991 Gulf War that Saudi Arabia's oil heartland has faced ballistic missile assault of this scale and precision. Let me walk you through exactly what happened in the last 6 hours. At 0347 hours local time on Monday, March 9, 2026, commercial satellite operators detected multiple thermal signatures consistent with ballistic missile launches from 3 separate locations inside Iranian territory. The launch sites were identified as facilities near Bandar Abbas on the Persian Gulf Coast, the Shahid Hemmat missile base outside Tehran, and a mobile launcher position in Iran's western Kermanshah province, approximately 180 kilometers from the Iraqi border. Within 4 minutes of launch detection, at 0351 hours, Saudi Arabia's Royal Saudi Air Defense Forces activated the country's integrated air defense network, including American-supplied Patriot Pack, 3 batteries positioned around Abqaiq and Khoury's oil facilities. At 0358 hours, Saudi state television interrupted regular programming with emergency broadcast announcing missile attack in progress and ordering civilians in the eastern province to shelter in place immediately. At 0402 hours, the first missiles began arriving over Saudi airspace. According to initial assessments from U.S. Central Command monitoring the situation from Qatar, between 8 and 12 ballistic missiles crossed into Saudi territory during a sustained barrage lasting approximately 11 minutes. At 0409 hours, explosions were reported at the Abqaiq processing facility, with local residents posting videos on social media showing multiple impact flashes and secondary explosions creating massive fireballs visible from 20 kilometers away. At 0413 hours, the attack concluded with final missile impacts recorded near the Khoury's oil field, Saudi Arabia's second-largest producing field, pumping approximately 1.5 million barrels daily. At 0427 hours, Iran's Revolutionary Guard Corps issued official statement through Fars news agency claiming responsibility for what it called precision strikes against terrorist infrastructure supporting Zionist aggression. The statement specifically named Abqaiq, Khoury's, and Ras Tanura oil facilities as targets, claiming all were successfully struck. At 0441 hours, Saudi Arabia's Ministry of Defense released initial response confirming missile attack occurred, stating that Saudi air defenses successfully intercepted 7 incoming missiles, but that several impacts occurred at oil infrastructure locations. The ministry's statement notably did not specify which facilities were hit or provide damage assessments. At 0509 hours, U.S. Secretary of State issued statement condemning the attack as reckless aggression threatening global energy security and confirming American intelligence assets were assisting Saudi damage assessment efforts. To understand the gravity of what just happened, you need to understand the weapon systems Iran deployed and the strategic significance of the targets they selected. The missiles used in this attack were almost certainly Shahab, 3 variants, or the newer K-bar Shikan medium-range ballistic missiles. The Shahab 3 is Iran's most battle-tested ballistic missile with a range of approximately 1,300 to 2,000 kilometers depending on payload configuration and a circular error probable. That's the radius within which half of all missiles will land. Of approximately 30 to 50 meters with maneuvering warhead improvements introduced over the past 5 years. These are not crude Scud derivatives anymore. Iran has spent 2 decades refining guidance systems, developing separating warheads that complicate interception, and incorporating terminal phase maneuvering that allows the warhead to adjust trajectory during final descent, making defensive intercepts exponentially harder. The K-bar Shikan, which Iran unveiled in February 2022, represents even more sophisticated capability with claimed accuracy improvements bringing CEP down to approximately 10 meters and incorporating solid fuel propulsion that eliminates the lengthy fueling process required by liquid-fueled missiles, dramatically reducing warning time from detection to launch. The distance from Iran's southern coast to Abqaiq is approximately 450 kilometers across the Persian Gulf, well within even Iran's older missile inventory range. From Kermanshah province in western Iran to eastern Saudi oil fields is approximately 850 kilometers, easily achievable for Shahab 3 class systems. What makes these strikes strategically significant is not the distance. Hitting Saudi Arabia from Iran is not technically challenging, but rather the targeting precision required to actually damage complex industrial facilities rather than simply landing missiles somewhere in Saudi territory. Abqaiq is not just another oil facility. This single processing complex handles approximately 70% of Saudi Arabia's total oil production, taking crude oil from multiple fields and processing it into export-grade petroleum that can be loaded onto tankers. The facility contains hundreds of stabilization towers, massive vertical columns that separate gases from crude oil, compression stations, desulfurization units, and control systems that regulate flow from upstream fields. Precision strikes hitting critical process units could disable substantial portions of Saudi export capacity for weeks or months, depending on damage severity. The 2019 drone and cruise missile attack on Abqaiq, which was also attributed to Iran though executed differently, temporarily knocked out approximately 5.7 million barrels per day of production, roughly 6% of global oil supply, and took months to fully restore despite the fact that the attack primarily targeted stabilization towers with relatively reparable damage. Curry's Field, the secondary target in this attack, contributes approximately 1.5 million barrels daily to Saudi production. Combined, these two facilities represent roughly 6.5 million barrels per day of production capacity. Ras Tanura, which Iran also claims to have targeted, is one of the world's largest oil ports and home to a massive refinery processing approximately 550,000 barrels daily. If Iran successfully struck critical infrastructure at even one of these locations with enough precision to cause meaningful damage, we are looking at potential global oil supply disruption measuring in millions of barrels per day. Now let me explain Iran's strategic calculation here, because this attack did not happen in a vacuum, and the timing is absolutely critical to understanding what Iran is trying to accomplish. For the past 6 weeks, the United States has been conducting what it calls freedom of navigation operations in the Strait of Hormuz with increasing frequency and increasingly aggressive posture. American and Saudi military cooperation has intensified dramatically following the signing of a comprehensive defense partnership in January 2026 that effectively extends American security guarantees to Saudi Arabia's critical infrastructure, including oil facilities. Iran views this partnership as direct threat to its leverage in any future negotiations over its nuclear program or sanctions relief. From Tehran's perspective, the American-Saudi alliance is designed to neutralize Iran's primary strategic asset, its ability to threaten regional energy infrastructure and global oil supplies. Iran's missile program has always functioned as deterrent against American or Israeli military action. The logic is straightforward. If the United States strikes Iranian nuclear facilities, Iran can retaliate by devastating Saudi and UAE oil infrastructure, triggering global economic crisis that would impose massive costs on Washington and its allies. But that deterrent only works if adversaries believe Iran can actually execute those strikes successfully and if Iran demonstrates willingness to accept the consequences of such action. This is where strategic signaling becomes crucial. By striking Abqaiq during a period of elevated tensions, but before any kinetic action has been taken against Iran itself, Tehran is attempting to demonstrate capability and resolve simultaneously. According to Dr. Kenneth Katzman, senior Middle East analyst at the Congressional Research Service who has studied Iranian strategy for 3 decades, the timing of this strike reflects what he calls coercive deterrence. Iran is trying to prevent American-Saudi military cooperation from advancing further by demonstrating that such cooperation will make Saudi energy infrastructure a target rather than protecting it. The message to Riyadh is clear. Aligning with Washington makes you less secure, not more secure, because it provokes Iranian retaliation. The message to Washington is equally clear. Your security guarantees to regional partners are hollow because Iran possesses the capability to overwhelm defensive systems and strike high-value targets at will. But here's what makes this particular attack so dangerous. Iran has crossed a threshold that it deliberately avoided crossing during previous escalation cycles. In 2019, when tensions were perhaps even higher than today, Iran attacked Saudi oil facilities using drones and cruise missiles but employed operational ambiguity. The attack was never officially claimed by Iran, allowing both sides to step back from direct confrontation. Iran maintained plausible deniability even though U.S. intelligence conclusively attributed the attack to Iranian forces. This time, the Revolutionary Guard Corps claimed responsibility within 30 minutes of the strikes concluding. That is a fundamentally different posture. Iran is not seeking plausible deniability or off-ramps here. Iran is openly attacking Saudi Arabia and daring the United States and Saudi Arabia to respond. That represents a level of escalatory risk that frankly has no precedent in the modern period of U.S.-Iran tensions. Let's examine the defensive challenge Saudi Arabia faced in attempting to intercept these missiles. Saudi air defenses consist primarily of American-supplied Patriot Pack, 3 batteries specifically designed to engage ballistic missiles in their terminal phase. The kingdom has approximately 12 Patriot batteries deployed across strategic locations, with heavy concentration around the capital Riyadh and around eastern oil infrastructure. The Patriot system in its Pack 3 configuration has demonstrated reasonable effectiveness against older Scud-type ballistic missiles, achieving intercept rates of approximately 50 to 70% in actual combat conditions during previous conflicts. However, Patriot faces severe challenges against modern Iranian missiles with maneuvering warheads. The engagement timeline is brutally compressed. A ballistic missile traveling at Mach 5 to Mach 7 during terminal descent gives defenders approximately 60 to 90 seconds from detection to impact. The Patriot radar must detect the incoming target, calculate intercept trajectory, launch interceptor missile, guide that interceptor to target, and achieve kinetic kill, all within that 60 to 90 second window. When the target is maneuvering unpredictably during final approach, the probability of successful intercept drops dramatically. Additionally, Patriot batteries have magazine depth limitations. Each launcher holds for interceptor missiles. Engaging a saturation attack with 8 to 12 incoming missiles simultaneously arriving can exhaust available interceptors quickly, especially if Iran employed decoys or sacrificial missiles designed to waste interceptors before high-value warheads arrive. The Saudi Ministry of Defense claims 7 successful intercepts out of what U.S. Central Command assesses was between 8 and 12 total missiles. If accurate, that represents intercept rate above historical performance, suggesting either Saudi operators performed exceptionally well under pressure or Iran's missile accuracy was degraded compared to test conditions. But here's what matters more than the intercept statistics. Even if Saudi defenses intercepted 70% of incoming missiles, that means 3 to 4 missiles reach their targets. At facilities as sensitive as Abqaiq, even a single 500-kilogram warhead detonating near critical process equipment can cause catastrophic damage requiring weeks or months to repair. Now I need to explain why the United States finds itself in an absolutely impossible strategic position right now. President Trump has spent 3 years rebuilding relationships with Gulf Arab states that were strained during the previous administration. The comprehensive defense partnership with Saudi Arabia signed in January represents cornerstone of Trump's Middle East policy designed to create united front against Iranian aggression. That partnership includes explicit American commitment to defend Saudi critical infrastructure, specifically oil facilities, against external attack. The Saudis paid billions for American defense systems and accepted American security guarantees in exchange for continued oil production commitments and regional cooperation against Iran. Now, 36 days after that partnership was signed, Iran has conducted the exact attack that the partnership was designed to deter and prevent. If the United States does not respond with military force against Iran, the entire credibility of American security guarantees collapses not just in the Middle East, but globally. Allies in East Asia watching how America responds to direct attack on a treaty partner will draw immediate conclusions about whether American commitments to defend Taiwan, Japan, or South Korea carry any weight. But if the United States does respond with strikes against Iranian territory, hitting missile facilities, Revolutionary Guard bases, or command and control infrastructure, Iran has already telegraphed its response playbook. Iran will escalate further by closing the Strait of Hormuz, through which approximately 21 million barrels of oil pass daily, roughly 21% of global petroleum consumption. Iran will activate proxy forces across the region. Hezbollah in Lebanon possesses approximately 150,000 rockets and missiles that can strike anywhere in Israel. Houthi forces in Yemen will intensify attacks on Saudi cities and possibly target shipping in the Red Sea and Bab el-Mandeb Strait. Shia militia groups in Iraq will attack American forces and personnel throughout the country. Within 72 hours of American strikes on Iran, we could see simultaneous conflicts erupting across 4 different theaters: Iran itself, Lebanon and Israel, Yemen and Saudi Arabia, and Iraq, with American forces and interests under attack in all 4 locations simultaneously. According to Ambassador James Jeffrey, former U.S. Special Representative for Syria Engagement and former Deputy National Security Advisor, who published analysis this morning through the Wilson Center, the United States has no good options in this scenario because Iran has successfully created what he calls escalation dominance, the ability to raise costs faster than adversaries can respond. Every American escalatory step provokes Iranian counter-escalation that imposes greater costs on U.S. interests than the American action imposed on Iran. Jeffrey argues that this dynamic is precisely what Iran has been building toward for 2 decades through its development of missiles, drones, and regional proxy networks. Iran cannot defeat the United States military in conventional conflict. The capability gap is simply too large. But Iran can make the cost of any American military action so devastating to regional stability and global economy that Washington ultimately concludes that military options are not viable regardless of technical capability to execute them. From Saudi Arabia's perspective, this attack represents an existential threat not to the kingdom's survival, but to its entire economic model. Saudi Arabia's economy depends almost entirely on oil revenue. Any sustained disruption to oil exports creates immediate fiscal crisis. The kingdom's foreign currency reserves, while substantial, cannot sustain government spending indefinitely without oil revenue. Mohammed bin Salman's entire Vision 2030 modernization program depends on steady oil income to fund diversification investments. If Iran demonstrates capability to hit Saudi oil infrastructure at will, and neither American defense systems nor American military retaliation can prevent such attacks, the fundamental premise of Saudi security collapses. The kingdom would face 2 options: reach accommodation with Iran accepting Tehran's regional influence in exchange for security guarantee for Saudi oil facilities, or pursue independent nuclear weapons capability to deter Iranian attacks through threat of catastrophic retaliation. The first option, accommodation with Iran, would represent complete reversal of Saudi regional policy and abandon the anti-Iran alliance that Riyadh has spent billions building. The second option, Saudi nuclear weapons, would trigger nuclear proliferation cascade across the Middle East as Egypt, Turkey, and potentially UAE pursue similar capabilities, fundamentally destabilizing the entire region for generations. Let me show you what international oil markets are already pricing in. Within minutes of the first social media reports of explosions at Abqaiq, Brent crude futures began spiking in Asian trading. As of 0600 hours Eastern Time, Brent crude is trading at $89.45 per barrel, up 12.7% from Friday's close of $79.38. West Texas Intermediate is at $85.23, up 11.9%. These are the largest single-day percentage increases in oil prices since the September 2019 Abqaiq attack, and we are only 6 hours into this crisis with no clarity yet on actual damage or production impacts. If Saudi Arabia confirms that Abqaiq has sustained significant damage requiring extended repairs, oil markets will price in supply disruption of 4 to 6 million barrels per day. That will drive prices toward $100 per barrel within 48 hours. If the United States retaliates militarily and Iran responds by attacking additional Gulf infrastructure or attempting to close the Strait of Hormuz, oil could spike to $120 to $150 per barrel. price levels not seen since the 2008 financial crisis. At those prices, global economic growth projections collapse. Transportation costs explode. Inflation that central banks have spent 3 years trying to control comes roaring back. Developing economies dependent on oil imports face immediate balance of payments crises. The economic consequences of this attack could exceed the military and strategic consequences depending on how long any supply disruption persists. China and Russia are watching this crisis with intense interest for very different reasons. China imports approximately 75% of its oil consumption, with substantial portion of that coming through the Strait of Hormuz and from Gulf producers, including Saudi Arabia. Chinese economic growth projections for 2026 already faced headwinds from property sector problems and sluggish consumer spending. Major oil price spike threatening to push China's economy into recession is absolutely not in Beijing's interest. But China also has strategic interest in seeing the United States trapped in another Middle Eastern conflict that diverts American military attention and resources away from the Indo-Pacific theater. If American carrier strike groups and air wings get pulled back to the Middle East to confront Iran, that reduces American ability to respond to Chinese actions regarding Taiwan or in the South China Sea. Beijing will likely attempt to position itself as mediator in this crisis, offering to use its relationship with Tehran to broker de-escalation in exchange for American concessions on Taiwan-related issues or sanctions relief for Chinese companies. Russia, meanwhile, benefits directly from oil price increases given that Russian economy remains heavily dependent on energy exports despite sanctions. Higher oil prices increase Russian revenue and ease budget pressures for military spending in Ukraine. Moscow has substantial leverage with Iran through arms sales, intelligence sharing, and diplomatic support at the UN Security Council. Putin will almost certainly offer mediation services while privately encouraging Iranian escalation just enough to keep oil prices elevated without triggering full regional war that could spiral beyond anyone's control. Israel faces perhaps the most complex strategic calculation of any actor in this crisis. Israeli intelligence services have been tracking Iranian missile program developments for decades with intimate awareness of every capability improvement and range extension. Israel knows that the same missiles that just hit Abqaiq from 450 kilometers away can hit Tel Aviv, Haifa, or any other Israeli city from Iranian territory. For years, Israeli strategy has focused on preventing Iran from acquiring nuclear weapons specifically because nuclear-armed Iran with precise ballistic missile delivery capability would fundamentally alter the regional balance. But Iran has now demonstrated that even without nuclear weapons, its conventional ballistic missile forces pose credible threat to critical infrastructure across the region. If Iran can hit Abqaiq with precision despite Saudi American air defenses, Iran can hit Israeli population centers, military bases, or critical infrastructure like Haifa port or natural gas platforms offshore. Israeli military planners have gamed out scenarios where Iran attacks Israeli targets as part of response to American strikes on Iranian territory. Those scenarios are extraordinarily concerning because Israeli civilian infrastructure is concentrated in narrow coastal corridor that offers minimal strategic depth. A saturation missile attack on Israeli cities could overwhelm Iron Dome and David's Sling defensive systems through sheer volume, potentially causing mass civilian casualties. Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu has historically pushed for aggressive American military action against Iran, arguing that only overwhelming force will deter Iranian aggression and coerce behavior change. But in current context, Israeli intelligence assessments reportedly warn that American strikes on Iran could trigger the exact Iranian retaliation against Israel that Jerusalem most fears, sustained missile and drone attacks from both Iranian territory and from Lebanese Hezbollah positions in the north. According to sources familiar with recent Israeli security cabinet discussions, there is growing debate within Israeli leadership about whether American military action against Iran serves Israeli interests or actually increases Israeli vulnerability by triggering Iranian retaliation without permanently eliminating Iranian capabilities. This represents a significant shift from traditional Israeli posture and indicates how seriously Israeli planners take the Iranian missile threat.